Carnage Chronicles VR is absolutely one of the best dungeon crawlers in VR. Unfortunately, it also has several issues which keep it from being one of the best games in VR. Hello, I'm Fast Lawyer. Today we're going to talk about Carnage Chronicles VR, one of my favorite VR dungeon crawlers. I bought it back in 2017, but it just came out of early access on July 31st, 2020. It's available for all the VR major headsets. It normally retails for $24.99. It was developed by Nordic Trolls, and Carnage Chronicles has been constantly updated since the time I bought it, and so now it feels like a very different game than when I first played it. And coming back to this game, there were things that I really loved what they did with this game, and there were other things that I felt were kind of dated now for 2020. So definitely Carnage Chronicles has a lot of positives going for it, but it also has some serious negatives that I could see some people not being into this game for those reasons. So what I love about Carnage Chronicles, well, first things first, it's absolutely beautiful. There's so many scenic vistas in this game. There's basically 3 dungeons in this game. Now these 3 dungeons are pretty massive, especially for VR. So when I say it only has 3 dungeons, that's not a negative. Okay, these 3 dungeons all are fun to explore, to discover their secrets, and to do the boss fight. So I spent about 14 hours in this game, a little over 14 hours in this game, and I wouldn't have done that if I just didn't love the world building that these developers were able to do. Honestly, as far as VR dungeon crawlers, this is probably the one with the most detail to it, where it just feels massive, other than something like Skyrim, which is, a port, but built exclusively for VR. Yeah, this feels pretty massive, and it just looks beautiful in VR. I took so many screenshots, so many really gorgeous scenic vistas, and yeah, it's one of those games where you can just go there and just kind of like relax and chill out, just enjoy the view, especially after you cleared the dungeon. There's many types of enemies as well. The boss fights are unique, and you have basically 2 classes. You have the archer class and the warrior class, which brings me to one of the negatives. I kind of expected the mage class to already be in the game, and I was surprised when I came back to this game and the mage class still was not included, which is a shame because I think the mage class is something that everyone expects for a VR dungeon crawler, and it's just a shame that it's not in there. The other poor part is that the core combat, while better than most VR games, is kind of outdated now for 2020, especially since you have really good VR action combat games and archery games in VR that really make the combat here feel too simple and with not enough steps. Don't get me wrong, it's still fun, but you notice it doesn't have the physics of some of the better VR melee games. Your Blade and Sorcery, your Until You Fall, those games that just have brought the VR combat genre to new heights with interesting melee combat mechanics. And while this is still fun, it's a bit dated now. It's just not as good as what maybe you're expecting, especially if you played those other games. Still, I had fun. I enjoyed my time with Carnage Chronicles. I also noticed some issues, though, on top of the fact that it's just too basic. Basically, it has a block and a swing mechanic. And some of the issues is hit detection. The hit detection here can be pretty awful at times, especially with multiple enemies. You'll swing at enemies and you'll hit absolutely nothing. You'll just see your sword go right through them without any contact. And sometimes it happens also just with movement. So it could be a single enemy and you'll swing your sword right at them, see the sword go through their body, and absolutely no damage, no contact. The other baffling part is how even though there's 2 classes, they don't feel different enough. So the big difference between the warrior class and the archery class is the crossbow. So the warrior has a crossbow, and the crossbow is actually very good. I'm jealous of warriors and a crossbow. However, I have to say I have more fun with the archer class. It just takes more skill to use the bow and arrow. And with the warrior class, like I said, the melee combat is not the strong suit. So you'll just run into that issue of, the hit detection issues, and just a lot of enemies that have shields will block your attacks, and that'll get a little tiresome. There is a nice mechanic here where if you block correctly, you can immediately melee the enemy in the right spot to get some damage on them, and you can also parry them. And if you quickly strike a exposed area, you can do some damage. So there is a nice element to the combat. It's just doesn't have enough depth, especially with the modern VR action combat games. The archery is okay. There's obviously better archery games in VR. Index comes to mind, but it's still okay. The one really disappointing thing about archery is how many dodges the enemies will make with your archery attacks. It's kind of silly how many times you'll have a headshot and then the enemy will dodge out of the way. It's really annoying. That's what makes the archery class annoying, but it also makes it more challenging and therefore more fun. So that's why I recommend the archery class. It's just more challenging. It takes more skill. There's also the aspect where a lot of this game is a gear check. So if you don't have enough damage with your weapon, if you don't have enough upgrades from your health, from your armor, from your rings, and from your necklace, it's going to take you that much longer to kill enemies. And once you get a group of enemies, if you don't kill them fast, you're going to die, especially with the healing enemies. And that's what kind of makes this game a little weird. The enemies have so many different attacks, and yet you only have a few. I kind of wish you had more weapons, more attacks than what you have. You're really limited to some basic attacks versus the enemies have so many more. It really brings down the experience. The other disappointing part is that it really doesn't matter whether you have a sword or an axe. There's no difference as far as types of damage. The only thing that matters is the listed damage output for that weapon, so they don't swing differently. There is no different tactics with whatever melee weapon you might have. Really, the only real difference is between the crossbow and the bow and arrow. That's the major difference in this game as far as combat for the player. I enjoyed the story, but there wasn't a whole lot to it. It seemed like one long quest, really. There's a few cutscenes, some narrated portions, but really the focus was on the combat. However, it does feel like you're on this epic journey, and it was a lot of fun exploring these 3 different dungeons and discovering their secrets and doing the boss fights. And while there are not a lot of puzzles, the puzzles that are there were very enjoyable to solve. Overall, I enjoyed this game immensely. It's one of the best VR dungeon crawlers. If I have to rate it, I'd give it a 7.5 out of 10. I highly recommend it. I'm Fast Lawyer. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.